This is Cathal Jack, and I am, as usual, joined by Mel Toy. And today we're going to talk about something a little bit more directly singer and performance related. We're going to talk about what kind of things we actually think about when we are on stage and when we are performing. So, Mel, what are your thoughts?
It's an interesting question. I think it's an interesting question just from the perspective of like, we all think different stuff, right? Do you know that there are people out there who don't have a voice inside their head? Did you know that?
It depends on who I'm talking to in my head.
Yeah. No,
I actually can't imagine that.
Yeah, it's like they don't have a narrative voice inside their head. So for those people, then like what do they think before they go on stage might be totally different to somebody who has a narrative voice inside their head.
What does the narrative voice actually say? You know, if the narrative voice is stirring coffee, does the narrative voice say, now I must pick up a spoon, now I must hold the spoon between my thumb and index finger, now I must stir coffee?
I don't know. Is that what your narrative voice?
Well, it's a bit like someone who's bilingual. For instance, I was having this conversation lately, and I'm bilingual as well. And I was asking them. I speak Irish and English. I pretend to speak French. And they spoke Irish and English as well. And I was asking her, did she think in Irish or in English? And I knew the answer already. She thought in Irish. I think in English, but I don't, fully form sentences in my head.
That's super interesting.
I must stir the coffee.
Well, I think some things we just work on because probably what's happening is that while you're stirring the coffee, you're thinking something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you like one of those kind of calm Zen people who's actually totally chilled and
I'm
not
definitely
thinking
not
about
one of
anything?
those people.
Yeah.
But that said, thinking of performing on stage, I don't think in lots of ways.
Well, you don't think at all? Like you have no thoughts before you go on stage, or are you thinking?
As an example, okay, I find rehearsing much more tiring and intense than I find performing. Now, part of it I think is that you will have, the energy that a room full of people for a show that gives you, and you have the adrenaline of all that, and you have the being in the moment and the spectacle. You have the big sound in a way that you don't have usually in a rehearsal. But also, I think that because when we rehearse, you're at the point where it's on autopilot for you mostly. I often equate it to driving a car. If I thought about what I must actually physically do, in terms of push in the clutch and push the brake and steer the wheel like this much rather than that much at a given moment, I think I'd crash. So it's instinctive and it's more, I don't know if a stream of consciousness is the right way to describe it. It's probably not. But I don't really think about it. If I thought about it, it'd be too late. And in a gig, if I thought about it, the moment will probably pass. As an example, I'm a voice coach and a performing singer. The only time that I ever think like a singing teacher or a trained singer during a performance is when I'm in trouble.
Okay. And you are able to then reconnect to yourself consciously to kind of put yourself back into whatever's going on.
I can do it. It's horrible. It's no fun. Which is another side of it, because I think certainly for me, the more present I am in the moment as a singer, the more disconnected I am from my conscious technical singing self, the better I tend to perform, and unequivocally the more I enjoy it. And which straight away I think makes me better.
So would you call that a state of flow then?
I have no idea what that is.
Would you call it being in the zone?
Yes.
Okay, so there's this state called flow, which was found by this guy called, I can never pronounce his name, and I know there's going to be listeners who are going to know who I'm talking about. So,
How you know this show is live, folks?
Yeah,
we're performing this session in the moment.
I can see it written. It's like check me high, or just me high, check me high, something like that. Yeah, but those of you, if you know, you know. Yeah, you know the guy. And the idea is that when your level of abilities meets just the right level of challenge, you can get into a state of flow. If the task is too hard and you're going to be working too hard, then you can't get into that space. And if the task is too easy, then you're bored. So you have to kind of like have everything kind of match to just the right kind of level, and when it matches, then you can get into a state of flow. And this is a state that performing musicians talk about all the time, which is about being in the zone. And there are other times where we might experience being in the zone. So I think of it like when you do production, if you're producing a song, you can start producing a song and then suddenly like 8 hours has gone by and you've just been in this room on this computer and you haven't noticed the time go by, and that's a state of flow because time moves differently as well when you're in a state of flow. Really, it's super.
I can imagine as well the parallels thing, because you know we are both performers, but we also are both voice coaches. Having a cognizance of that as people who train our voices, but also as people who help other people train their voices, is really important. That what did you call where you're overloaded?
Yeah, so if the task is too hard for you, then like you're so worried about your ability and you're so concentrated on your ability to try and do the thing, like you've got to work cognitively or physically too hard to try and achieve whatever it is that's going on.
But is that what we do when we train?
Maybe, but it depends what it is that you're finding hard, right? So
well, of course that's relative, but again, the principle. I said as a voice coach, I never think like a voice coach on stage unless I recognize that I'm in trouble, my voice is tired, or more usually I'm sick and I'm having to nurse my voice through a show. And at that point, I am very, very conscious of technically how I'm singing. So I do feel there's more of a challenge. It's a different kind of awareness and it's a different kind of presence with myself. It's no fun. I'm quite prepared, I'll stick my neck out, I'm quite prepared to say that a lot of the time training the voice isn't that much fun. Well, sorry, training is. Learning new things is. Practicing for me can be a bit tricky.
You know,
I know we spoke about that before.
Yeah, we've talked about practicing. I had a friend who joined me on my creativity week who suggested that practicing should be a time for really connecting with your inner artist, and I think that is such a cool way to approach it. So it's just kind of a side note. But getting back to this like too hard thing, the other thing that might be too hard is if you go for the wrong, is probably not the right use of words, but let's just say the wrong audience for you right now. So like if you're feeling a little nervous about getting up on stage, then going to a massive stadium might not be the best step. It might be about kind of working up to what's going to make you feel more comfortable on stage so that you're able to then get into that flow a little bit easier. So like working through, I love the idea of having like a friends night with your singer mates once a month, and people come over and they play each other songs and you drink some wine and you have some pizza or whatever. Yeah, like super chill. But the idea is that you get a chance to kind of share your voice and you share your music in a space that's comfortable, if that's where you're at, right? That might be boring for someone. That might be on the other end of that flow scale where it's like, I'm not getting anything out of this. Doesn't challenge me. It's just a bit of wine, right? That might feel more social then, but for somebody else, that might feel really challenging. So it's about kind of working out where you are on that spectrum and putting yourself just on the, just into that sweet spot so that you're able to get into that happy flow space when you're on stage.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose so. I remember it was a learning moment. I remember being at a Julian Lloyd Webber concert. So he did a concert with the pianist and it was amazing. But halfway through, it was really cool. He did a Q&A and there was about 400 people at the concert. And people could ask any question and I just couldn't resist. And I was sure I knew the answer. I said, what do you think about when you play, when you're performing? And the answer obviously was going to be, well, I'm so connected with my music and it is so natural to me that I don't really think about anything. And what he actually said was, I consider how it was yesterday when I practiced this piece, and I consider how it was today and the little things that I felt that I wanted to improve from yesterday and today, and I try and improve them right now. And I said, that is 1,000,000% not the answer I was expecting at all, because none of that came across in how he performed. There was such, but your word, flow, there was such a perfect flow where he was nearly disconnected from himself and out of his own way as he performed. But actually what he said he was thinking about was the complete opposite.
Oh,
It
that's
was
so
really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. Because I mean, like, if we think about, because we've talked about flow, but there are other things that people might be thinking about that would get them out of flow. So things that might take you out of flow would be like focusing on, what does the audience think of what I'm doing right now? That's a big one, because that gets you, you can't be in flow and be thinking about what other people are thinking. That's not possible, right?
Or even a stressful sound check, anything that puts you out of maybe your pre-gig routine, or a sound check that goes on too long. What I hate is a sound check where and it does happen, and you might be sorting out your in-ear mix until the last minute, or your in-ear mix mightn't be the way you want it, and it can really, I suppose here this word is making more sense, affect the flow.
Yeah, and it makes sense because you're then distracted by something.
So how much then of, in terms of finding this flow, for us as a performer on stage, how much of that is dependent upon us being in familiar surroundings? And I don't mean, obviously we can be in a different venue. It could be, your friend's sitting room or your own sitting room where you're having pizza and wine, like you said, or it could be, the O2 in London. Things like, I'm big on IEMs and monitor mixes. The familiarity and the comfort of knowing this is how I expect to hear myself. These are the musicians that I'm with. It's not necessarily about knowing how they smell, but knowing what they sound like and knowing their timing and their phrasing. The familiarity and the comfort of the consistency of these things surely must be a factor. Or is it just a factor for me?
Well, I think it's a factor for humans.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense for it to be a factor. I'm not referring to any research this time, but that makes sense to me. And I mean, you joke about like it's not how they smell, but it might be.
Yeah.
And it also might be, eye contact is such a big deal. And when you've been playing with musicians, and communication in general is such a big deal, you've been playing with musicians regularly, you learn how they communicate, and sometimes that can be a safety net as well when you're on stage, that allows you to let go a little bit more because you can trust the people that you're working with. And again, that comes back to distractions. You're minimizing distractions by working with people that for instance.
I'm trying to think of something practical that we can kind of focus on to say, if you want to help yourself get into the zone. I'm realizing as I'm thinking about it, in performance terms, a huge one is tempo. And I think if there are listeners who might have experience of playing, for instance, with click tracks versus not playing, I think they'll be able to relate to that. Yeah. For me, in-ears. For me, a gig without in-ears is my idea of hell. For me, a gig with in-ears but in mono is my idea of purgatory. It's not terrible, but it's not great. But having a good in-ear mix in stereo where I can place things the way I want them, for me, is really important to feeling comfortable to perform at my best.
Love that. So yeah, and even sticking with, even if if you're a performer and you don't use in-ears for monitoring purposes, but you do use earplugs for oral health, then having a pair of earplugs that you're used to working with and that you practice with is a big deal because of the frequencies that get changed. Finding a set that works for you. Even things like costuming. So what do you wear when you go on stage? How do you say,
good shoes? If you're gonna stand on a microphone, you're standing in a square meter for maybe 2 hours. Make sure your footwear is good.
Your footwear, and that you feel physically comfortable in terms of how you present yourself as well. So this is something that comes up quite a lot when I'm talking to people about performance anxiety, is that for some artists, they have to wear a certain shade of lipstick, or they have to wear a certain type of like shoe, but not necessarily for comfort, but for how attractive it makes them feel, because that then gives them the confidence, and then because they feel confident, they're then able to get into flow because they're not distracted. It comes back to distractions, right? By how they feel they're presenting themselves to an audience. And the great thing about those things, be it in-ear monitors, earplugs, costumes, shoes, lipstick, the instrument that you're using, making sure if that you're using your own gear and that you know how to use it, blah, blah, blah. All of those things are things that are consistent. So they're things that you can also take with you to rehearsals. and then you can create a safe space within which you perform regularly by constantly engaging with those things, which can help you get into flow a little bit quicker.
Totally. And of course, your vocal warm-up.
Yes. Warm up, people, and cool down. But that's after flow. Post flow.
Don't forget your straw.
Don't forget your straw.
Yes. So yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. I think it's obviously very subjective. I'm just trying to think, for me to kind of conclude, if this is thought provoking to anyone, but at the same time they're wondering what are these things for me, just start to make a list, and even keep a note in your phone of nights, because we normally perform at night, of the shows that you do where something did kind of upset your flow. Note what that was and bring it to your awareness as something that might be helpful for you to feel more in control of.
I love that. Yeah, and in that way, if you have a night where stuff gets a little bit disrupted, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but a learning experience, which is awesome. Love that.
Brilliant. Guys, we hope you found today's conversation helpful. We encourage you to click on our other videos. If you have any comments, questions, or indeed topics that you feel would be interesting for us to talk about, please do message us or leave a comment on the video. Do feel free to share as well. We want to spread this word for everyone. Thank you very much. Mel, say thanks.
See you guys later. Much love.
Bye, guys. Thank you.